Greetings, all you wonderful people, my fellow time travellers. It's always good, as I say, to have you with me for a journey through space and time that would otherwise be very lonely. This one's about one of the great fault lines in history. It was a cleaving, an abyss that opened up between church and state, and it was a consequence of church and state going head to head. You know, the person that represented earth and the person that represented heaven got into the ring together. It's a cracker. But before we get started on that episode, let me remind you, please bear with me while I suggest you check out my patreon.com site. It's that presence there, and it's your support, financial support of that presence, that makes everything else that we do on here possible. There's a quid pro quo. You get early access to new content, and there's an exclusive question and answer video every week, which is a bit like a chat between thee and me. Anyway, it's a great site, trust me, and if you go there and stir yourself into the mix, you'll surely make it even better. So get along there, and I'll see you there. Okay, now it's time to strap into the time machine as we hurtle off towards the next stop in my love letter to the world. Cue the music. The church presented itself as top dog, as the daddy. Deadly violence erupts as the mob frees a famous charioteer. State retribution is swift, brutal, and extreme. Thousands of innocents are killed. Appalled by the atrocity, the church excommunicates the man who ordered it, the Roman Emperor. The battle of wills between church and state is born, a tug of war over the mastery of the people that is one of the greatest themes in the history of the world. Endeavouring to understand history in hopes of illuminating the future, I'm Neil Oliver, and this is my love letter to the world.
Hi Neil. In the last episode, it was 306 AD, and we watched a mighty Roman army proclaim their man, Constantine, emperor. Where are we this week?
Hi Paul. Well, this week we're in Milan. It's the best part of a century later, and at this point in time, Milan is a place to be. It's where the power is. It's home to both the Roman Emperor, the King of Kings, and to the most famous and celebrated churchman in Christendom. We're right outside the city's spectacular cathedral as Bishop Ambrose goes head to head with Emperor Theodosius. Well, we're in Milan, basically. We're also briefly in Thessalonica, which is Roman Greece, if you like. You know, that place that was Greece, but under Roman rule at the time we're talking about, and a principal city there called Thessalonica, actually one of the richest populous ports and cities in the empire. Significant place. But actually we start off in Milan. It's Christmas Day, 390 AD, and no lesser figure than the Roman Emperor Theodosius, also known as Theodosius the Great, is hanging about outside the cathedral in Milan, trying to get in, and he's not allowed in. He's the Roman Emperor. You know, he's not. He shares rule with another, but he's the Roman Emperor, and he's hanging about outside the locked doors. They're locked against him of the cathedral in Milan, and he's not dressed in his imperial raiment. He's in the garb of a penitent, because the fact is, at this moment, he's excommunicated. He has been excommunicated for months at this point, so he's excluded. Since the spring of the year 390, he has been excluded from the church, and he's excommunicated, which means if that state is to continue for him, that means he doesn't get to heaven. He's out. He's in he's in perdition, he's in hell, unless he can rectify the situation. So it's pretty grim. He has turned up various times with his little entourage, knocking on the door, trying to get in, and the person who's turning him away all the time is Bishop Ambrose of Milan. So it's Christmas Day 390, and finally on this Christmas Day, after months of suffering, if you like, the doors creak open, and Emperor Theodosius is invited back into the loving arms of the Mother Church. And so, by the end of the rituals and ceremonies that take place that day, he's excommunicated no longer. He's back in with the good guys. This is a significant moment, if ever there was one, in the story of the world, because for the first time, a Christian churchman has won submission from a king. In fact, a king of kings, an emperor, the Roman emperor. The Roman emperor has gone on his knees in front of this bishop to beg for forgiveness. And by sheer force of will, this Bishop Ambrose of Milan has demonstrated for all to see, because it's a big theatrical number, it's a big song and dance, that his office, held from God, weighs more than that of any earthly king, even an emperor. Because he's got his power from God, that's the trump card. And but this is the first time that this play act is performed, and the people are shown that this is the case. And after all, Theodosius, at the very least, he must have been playing along with it. Either it was honest and genuine, and he was operating as a penitent Christian man, excommunicated and desperate to resolve the situation, or he may have been playing a part in a performance that was designed to influence the people. But there's no doubting, though, that it showed how far Christianity had come. It's 390 AD, just 100 years before. Christians had been thrown to the lions in the Colosseum and in hippodromes, up and down the empire. They were meat for the animals. And now a bishop has demonstrated his seniority over the emperor. It's quite a thing. In just 100 years, this is the position that Christianity has reached. And in this moment, this tussle between Theodosius and Ambrose of Milan, it begins one of the great themes of the story of the world, or at the very least, the story of the Western European world, which is to say, from this moment on, there's an endless tug of war begins between church and state to demonstrate who has the upper hand in the control of the people, body and soul. And again it comes down to the personalities involved. It depends who is the earthly ruler and who is the churchman in question. But it's a story that plays out again and again and again from this time on. It's worth knowing, I suppose, that Ambrose was Roman to the core. He was the son of a Praetorian prefect, which is to say a senior, a very high-ranking Roman official. And by the time of his dust-up with Theodosius, he's arguably the most celebrated church figure, church father in the whole of Christendom. It has to do with the stance that he has taken on various issues, the things that he has said, the books that he has written, just his personality. He has established himself as one of the shining lights, one of the figures to whom everyone pays attention. For one thing, he was a staunch opponent of the principal heresy of the time, which was Arianism. Arianism after Arius, who was a churchman in Alexandria. It's so, as with all the heresies, it's the stuff of anal retentive nitpicking a lot of the time. It comes down to the most finicky details from time to time. But in the case of the Arian heresy, it was actually something quite profound. Theodosius comes after Constantine the Great, that we've already had the adventure with. Constantine, the Roman emperor, who was hailed in York and then spent 20 years establishing his position. And he it was who had summoned the council at Nicaea, which, brought together all the significant churchmen of the time, all the Christian churchmen of the time, to thrash out exactly what Christianity was. Out of that council came the Nicene Creed. And the Nicene Creed, one of the central points was that the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit were, as far as the Nicene Creed was concerned, were all of one substance, and they had all been there forever. They had all three of them had always existed. That was the decision of the Nicene Creed. The Arian heresy held that Jesus, the Son, was born from God, and that therefore he hadn't been there at the beginning of time. He had come along later. It revered Jesus, the Son, but it held that God the Father was there at the beginning on his own, and from him had come Jesus, the Son. And that flew in the face of the Nicene Creed that said no. You get it in John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word is Jesus, the Logos, reason. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That idea that although we don't see him until he appears in the Holy Land, Jesus has always been there. We just don't get to see him until he makes that appearance.
So, even though he's his son, because you'd imagine anyone's son would come later than them.
Well, yes, it's all part of the mystery, Paul. It's all part of the mystery of the church, of Christianity. But the idea is that although we didn't receive him, he didn't incarnate, he didn't become flesh until he appears as, Jesus of Nazareth. Nonetheless, he was always there. He's the same stuff as God, and he's there with God at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Okay, it's that way of establishing the Trinity, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, as being all there forever, all there together, and all there from the beginning, from before the beginning. They're just always there. So this was in the nature of the early centuries of the church. It was one heresy after another that was being put down. So anyway, Ambrose had been a very staunch opponent of Arianism and a very strong supporter of the Nicene Creed. He's an interesting man. He insisted, he was like an early socialist. He insisted that the poor be treated as equals, that the poor were not to be mistreated or looked down upon. And it all came from a teaching which I don't think wasn't Ambrose's idea, but he was a strong proponent of the idea that in the beginning God had intended the resources of the world, everything, would be shared equally. Rather than there being, saying at no point was it God's plan that there would be a handful of elite and everybody else scrabbling about in the dust for scraps. That was never the plan. And that had only happened because of the connivance and the wickedness of men. The idea in the beginning was that everyone was equal. And for example, there's a line that goes, when Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentle man? The idea being that when God created Adam and Eve, he wasn't planning that there would be an elite with a subservient population beneath them. So Ambrose preached that it was Christian duty, obligation to share wealth with the poor, and to acknowledge that they were poor because wealth had been unfairly denied them. It was quite revolutionary stuff, but it was all part of what had drawn a lot of attention to him and had established him as this most forthright and most prominent, most famous, celebrated churchman of the time. Theodosius was equally devout. He was also an opponent of that Arian heresy, a strong defender of the Nicene Creed that he'd inherited from Constantine. And in truth, it was Theodosius, really, effectively, more than Constantine, who actually saw to it that Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire. Constantine kind of lit the blue touch paper, but it was really Theodosius' efforts that established Christianity as the religion of the Roman Empire. Theodosius had his court in Milan. That was where he was. That's where he was based, and that was where Ambrose was. And Ambrose had been Theodosius' advisor. Was Theodosius' advisor on church matters. Okay, now what happens that causes all the trouble that ends up with Theodosius being excommunicated and locked out of the cathedral is a massacre in Thessalonica, this city in Roman Greece. It was garrisoned, in the year in question, it was garrisoned by Goths. When I say garrisoned, you might imagine it being like the local police force. Big city, big population, and it was Roman soldiers, employees, conscripts of Rome, who were there to maintain Roman authority over the place. And by 390, it was Goths. Now, the Goths were a barbarian tribe, a barbarian people, or they had been. As recently as 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, a Goth army had fought and defeated a Roman army. So as recently as 378, Roman soldiers and Goths had been at each other's throats. But in the intervening period, and this wasn't something that was exclusive to Goths, but Goths were amongst those who had been welcomed into imperial territory as foederati. And foederati were outsiders, barbarian people who were welcomed in on the basis of having signed peace treaties. It was very much the case that the Romans reached a point with so many barbarian peoples out beyond the borders, out beyond the boundaries, who wanted in. It was becoming impossible. And so, as a compromise, they were bringing them in so that these people were inside the tent pissing out rather than outside the tent pissing in. So they were welcomed in, and they were given territory, and they were given position.
I suppose because the Roman Empire lasted so long, it's hard to get your head around those timescales, and so whole groups of people coming in over centuries isn't such an odd concept, really.
Yeah, I mean, it happened. It wasn't the case at the beginning, but it became more and more a necessary compromise as the centuries went on. And yes, it was just too exhausting to keep everybody out that had once upon a time been deemed as undesirable. It just wasn't practical. And in any way, as the empire kept growing, you need more of everything. You need more fighting men. You need more gold. You need more farmland. You need more crops. You need more. And so it became just an answer to many problems to gradually bring these people in and make use of them. Have them fighting for you against others rather than constantly fighting against all of them. But the point was, certainly in a place like Thessalonica, the Roman citizens, a lot of them still regarded Goths as the enemy. They were suspicious of them, frightened of them, ill-disposed towards them, and they certainly didn't like being told what to do by them. They're the enemy. They had been the enemy, and now here they were, bold as brass, marching about the streets, telling people what to do and imposing discipline and authority. In actual fact, what sparks the massacre is chariot racing. Believe it or believe it not. Like every other big Roman city, there was a hippodrome. Hippo is horse, not hippopotamus. Well, hippopotamus means the horse of the river, actually, but hippodrome, it's a place for chariot racing with chariots pulled by horses. And in Thessalonica, it was a big deal. It's like the football of the day. Everyone had a team. Everyone was fanatical about chariot racing. And in Thessalonica, a chariot racing hero had been accused of the rape of a slave boy. And word of that crime had got to the Goth garrison commander, a man called Bothric, who arrested the charioteer and threw him in jail. And the Thessalonians went bonkers. It was like they'd thrown, I don't know, Messi or Beckham or something in jail. They wanted him out. They wanted him in the Hippodrome where he could win the money, because there's a lot of money changed hands in these things. So a mob gathered outside the headquarters of the Goth garrison demanding the release of their man. And Bothric said, "No, you're not having him. He's going to be tried for what he's been charged with." And the mob took the law into their own hands, and they killed Bothric, and they killed every last man of the garrison. Right, big deal. This is a big deal, and they got their charioteer back, set him free. Well, word of this, as you can imagine, got back to Theodosius back in Milan, and in a rage, apparently amongst other things, he could be quite quick-tempered. He was a bit tasty in a corner, and he sent word that the next contingent of Roman soldiers was to get into Thessalonica and punish the population. Almost immediately. It was like as soon as he dropped the letter in the letterbox, or dispatched the messenger to start the word getting to Thessalonica, he regretted it, and allegedly he sent word saying don't, but it was too late. The one message got there, and everything else that was about to happen happened. And the Roman soldiers in question, they waited until everyone was in the Hippodrome, and then they shut the gates, and they set about them with swords and the rest. And between the slaughter and the stampede that was caused, well, it was estimated that perhaps 7,000 people were killed.
Wow.
7,000 Thessalonians. There's a later historian called Theodoret of Cyrus, and he wrote how Theodosius had, and I quote, gratified his desire for vengeance by unsheathing the sword most unjustly and tyrannically against all, slaying the innocent and guilty. Like ears of wheat in the time of harvest, they were alike cut down. So, it's bad optics, as they say. And Theodosius, his court was in Milan. Ambrose's cathedral and base of operations was in Milan, and when Ambrose heard about the massacre, he excommunicated Theodosius. After all, Theodosius, as far as he was concerned, was just another parishioner. He was just another member of his congregation, and he excommunicated him. So at this point you get into the realms of exactly what happened. Subsequent historians have suggested that perhaps the massacre wasn't anything like on the scale as described by Theodoret of Cyrus. Something happened, but it might not have been. Maybe knock a zero off the end of the death toll. I don't know. You know how these things can get exaggerated. Nobody knows. And also, there may have been a complex interplay of church and state politics going on that inspired Theodosius in some kind of Machiavellian way to play along with the show. Maybe as part of bigging up the role of the church. It's difficult to know. Or he may simply have been outmanoeuvred by his bishop, who timed it right and was able to get the upper hand. It's difficult to know. But in any event, in that moment between them, one way or another, Theodosius and Ambrose demonstrated that the church, the Christian church, had grounds for claiming that it held sway over mere earthly rulers. And that was a big deal. For the first time in Western Europe, the Western Europe of the Roman Empire, for the first time, not for the last time, the church presented itself as top dog, as the daddy. The consequences of that moment would ripple across history for millennia to come.
I guess the church in the UK and America and wherever isn't as powerful as it used to be, but it still has a big impact on politics, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it, the way every American president, whatever their private feelings on the matter are, they always present themselves as subject to God. They all do. God bless America. every American president has invoked God, the Christian God, because it's just too politically dangerous for any of them to step forward and deny God and present themselves as anything but God-fearing. It is quite extraordinary, but that is still tightly bound around American politics, without a shadow of a doubt. I love the synchronicity of the fact that Ambrose and his attitude to the poor. I mean, he was from wealth and status himself anyway. We're not dealing with a boy from the streets here, but politically or from the heart, he was warning that it was unacceptable to have an elite with all the money and the poor with an equal share of nothing. That's what we're fighting about now. 1700 years later, we're fighting about the same, or some of us are fighting about the same thing, about the greatest redistribution of wealth at the moment. That's what people are upset about. That the Bezoses and the Soros and Gates and all the rest of them have all the money, and more people are sharing less and less. And it's interesting that Ambrose of Milan was making that point in 390 AD. The same stuff over and over again. A vast, glittering empire, ruling for over 1,000 years. A brave and loyal general who fights ferociously for his Roman masters is turned against them. A mighty Goth army battles its way into Rome and sacks the city. Civilization, citizen confidence, and the empire are rocked. The vast, all-powerful Roman project is teetering on the abyss. Next time in my love letter to the world. To help support this podcast and get access to new and exclusive history and comment vodcasts every week, sign up to my Neil Oliver Patreon site. It'd be great to see you there. Check out the Instagram account called Neil Oliver Love Letter. My YouTube channel is simply called The Neil Oliver Channel. And to help build this podcast, tell your friends about it, get them listening, and write a review to convince the online crowd to join us. For further reading about these moments in time, you could try my book. It's called The Story of the World in 100 Moments, and it's published by Transworld. Neil Oliver's Love Letter to the World is produced by Neil Oliver and Paul Ratcliffe for Catnip Inc. Music is composed by Milo McKinnon. Social media and YouTube producer is Oscar, CFR. Additional research is by Evie, Lucian, Archie and Teddy. Finance is by Catherine and Trudy. Post-production is by Althorpe Studios, and the graphics are by Paul Plowman. Thanks for listening. This has been a Catnip Inc. Podcasts production.